My name is Kelly Harlton. I'm out here today shooting another video with my mentor and guru, Morris Kochanski, and Randy Bujma behind the camera. He's our man. We thought we'd pick some different things to do today. So the video you're about to see here, we're going to do something on hands as your tools. We somehow we get to be fairly reliant on some of our favorite tools, and sometimes those tools get a little overused. So we'll give some examples of that, some of the things we can do actually more efficiently with the bare hands than we can do with our knife. So.
The issue is that if the less you use your knife, the less you're exposed to being cut by it.
Oh yeah.
So there are a lot of, and then in the use of the knife, like I was mentioning, when you harvest the boughs, we would cut all the boughs with a knife, and there were quite a high incidences of people cutting themselves, and discovered that when we learned to harvest them by hand alone, then you eliminated that hazard, and you actually did a better and faster job because you could harvest those boughs in the darkness. You didn't have to see what your knife is doing. You wouldn't want to cut off.
Two hands if you're good.
Yeah, you got two hands, whereas you'd have to use one with a knife. And, yeah.
Yeah, well, talking about that, we'll show the first thing off here. So very typically on our courses and in situations, we need to harvest material that is a little bit supple but will still break. And the one you can of course do it with a knife when you're risking some hazards, or you'll see people come up and they'll start bending it back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and actually fighting things quite a bit. And so I'm just going to get this sideways for the camera. You see that, Rand? So I'm actually just going to bend the branch away from me till I hear it snap, and then I'm just going to pull it straight towards myself and create sort of a banana peel effect. So a really, really efficient way to collect your fans for roof coverings or beds or whatever you need, and other material too, even small saplings, softer woods like alder and things. So you can do that very same technique. I'll maybe show that in a minute.
Yeah, the boughs, we're talking about, boughs don't really shed very well. They might actually be more useful for bed making, for mattress making. So in the winter you use boughs because you don't have any leafy materials, but in the summer you use leafy materials like alders and so on, because each leaf is a shingle, and you'll create a far better rainproof roof than you can with needled type trees. And if you're going to pick on needled trees, balsam fir has the most shedding property. Yeah. And you also find that the way you put the boughs on, you have about 6 different ways, with the stem up, and the underside of the bough to the weather is, of all the choices you have, that seems to be we get pretty precise about exactly how everything is used.
Absolutely. Which way the bow goes. Yeah.
Morris, can you tell us about the history of the boughs here and how long it took?
Oh yeah. Well, when you first started, when we first started, the necessity to gather boughs, you're fixated on the fact you need a tool to do it. And like I say, it took about 10 years before a person gets the point of analysis and concern and everything, and say, if we didn't bother using a knife, things would there'd be a lot less cuts. And then in the end you discover, well, first of all, people would snap the branch and then they'd pull. You got to snap the branch, parallel the branch to the stem, and then pull, and it comes off easy. So it took a while to realize that you've got to break the branch, and then once it's parallel, but it took 10 years, and that's the way things go with a lot of things. That who would have thought that it would be superior to harvest them strictly by hand rather than use a knife? Because if you don't have a knife, you can still make shelters and bough beds and so on.
Next thing we'll show is another example. You could take some time with a knife, but sometimes it's easy. We're going to strip we want to strip the twigs off this little sapling. So if we just give it a sharp pull, it snaps off. But that, after a short period of time, isn't so fun on your hand. So then what Morris taught us to do is you start to use the twigs themselves as the padding on your hand. And then all of a sudden you have a surprising amount. Your strength is often controlled by pain. So holy smokes, the size of branch you can snap off without hurting your hand anymore.
Well, there's another opportunity to use a knife to cut those branches off, and the situation is the knife doesn't leave a smooth, because if you're using a knife, very often that causes the punctures in your fabric, And the other thing, again, you're able to delimb the tree without using a sharp tool where you could cut your thumbnail off or something.
And leave-
And the
leave
common
sharper
thing with
branches.
the knife is that as you're cutting, you often nick the stick and it'll snap there.
Oh, no,
When you use your bare hands, you eliminate that. So you get, once you get the idea that that jerk is required to be able, because if you sneak up on it, it's harder for you to do that. And also there are times when you ask yourself, do I need to limb this? Because sometimes when you leave the limbs on, that they almost, you might say that they make a rope
Right.
a little bit. So there are times, and there are times you build a shorter, you leave these on because you can use them
They work in your favor.
cross ties.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
you're not having to artificially tie because the branches are there. And then you delimit, if they're bothering you and they're sticking in your face, after the structure is done, then you rip it off.
And you do some trimming. Okay.
Right, so.
All trees aren't created equal either. That was an alder and a black poplar sapling, and then this is a birch. So they get progressively harder, right? So birch tends to be a little nasty. Nastiest is probably maybe Saskatoon. It probably can start to hurt the hands, but as you get into the harder woods. But no, this is
And the fact that you're
behaving.
keeping a handful, it allows you to control, and those branches that you're breaking off can be put to use, either as part of your pillow or your bed. If they're green, they might not catch on fire so much, or they're set up on the ground in a certain pattern to keep your feet dry, on account that in the snow, if your feet is sitting there, well, students, they throw those up and they don't benefit from the. Now, when you're using an alder, sometimes you'll find that the tensile aspect of the bark, and you scrape that with something to destroy the
Little
tensile strength. So you sometimes got to work twice as hard
Yeah.
fighting the bark. And you can, yeah, like that makes a huge difference in your ability to be able to twist, because and you can take this bark off in some cases in a ribbon and use it in some applications. The bark from a thin birch that was used for lashing spears and things for fishing, because anything else would tend to loosen when it's soaked, whereas the elasticity in the ribbon made out of birch bark would. There are many different ways of doing this. One way I do it is I make a crank out of the thick end,
And on the tree.
and then I use it as a crank. In the Finnish tradition, they say that if you're going to learn anything about the forest, you first have to learn to twist birch, implying that it's the simplest operation that you get some value out of. Because the birch, when you don't twist it, will of course be quite brittle, and it'll snap as you're trying to tie stuff, for sure. And the thicker ones, when we split them in half or thirds or quarters, and we get that much more mileage out of the binding material.
Next thing we're going to show is cutting twine with your bare hands. Natural fiber and your hemps and sisals and things like that, not so bad. Braided nylon might be an idea to stay away from.
Yeah. Yeah, the sisal baler twine and that plastic baler twine that they use for, there's a sisal twine is for binders, and there's heavier twine that's for balers. You're getting really good when you can break the baler twine, that thicker stuff.
Yeah.
But you better be very coordinated and practiced.
Well, did you ever have anybody else that could break braided twine besides you?
Well, I was the only one that I think would get that far, because
Yeah, that's-
the difference between me and other people is that I have the opportunity to do it thousands of times in my life. And the more you break the breakable twine, the more it sets up the thing for you to take on bigger and thicker. It's like that karate or kung fu, where the Japanese dentists, they would pull your teeth. They would pull pegs out of a board. So finally, they just use their fingers to pull your teeth. Well, when you find the guys that split the boards with chop of the hand. Your 1,000th one, you're getting really good, but it takes 1,000 chops before. Well,
That's
same
looking
thing
really
with
good.
breaking the twine.
So just a special way of wrapping the twine up in your hands. So you end up with this configuration here, and all of a sudden just breaks maybe 10 times easier than it would if you were just trying to break it like this. So that's a natural twine.
Well, the heavier twines, you wrap one end around your foot.
Yeah,
And you draw it up, and there's a kind of a technique where you...
Yeah, that's I'll sacrifice this little guy. And I found even the strands, inner strands of paracord. Lend themselves
Have
to.
you seen that twine where they include all kinds of, like, one twine, you take it out of your cord for kindling, for lighting fire, and another cord is your fish light?
Yeah.
Oh, what a travesty. Some people figure they're very inventive.
So this is the 30-pound nylon strand out of a piece of paracord. Which another way.
35-pound test.
Yeah, 35-pound test. We've broken that easily. Don't try that this way, or you will guaranteed cut your hands, right? And then we're going to use a rope to cut a rope. So this is a good lesson for people that are around climbing ropes and that, when you learn not to cross your climbing ropes, because if you do have a fall and one rope runs across the other rope in an amazingly split second, it'll actually go through a rope. So I'm just going to use one piece of paracord to cut another piece of paracord. So
Now they're taking about 3 times as long to do that to a climbing rope.
yeah, yeah, but not much longer. Yeah.
It's remarkable. I guess it must melt its way through.
Yeah, but even all the inner strands, you think it would have to sort of work its way through, but so this is some high tensile, some fairly tensile snare wire. This is heavier than 20 gauge, so it's a little probably heavier than we'd want to use we could use for squirrel and rabbit. But I like the heavier stuff because it's good for other things around camp, and you can still use it as snare wire. So the way that we cut the wire is we just tie a simple slip knot. Like so. And then we just pull the knot tight. And it makes a nice clean snap. And when you don't have your, you don't want to wreck your knife, or if you're not carrying cutters, the fast way to cut your wire into snare lengths. I showed me how to make a quick snare with mitts on. You're 30 below and you're getting tired of taking your mitts off, so you just do a big overhand and just slide it like this. He said that's all that's required there for a squirrel or a rabbit. That's it. And you just thread the other end through your overhand, so you can make your snare without taking your mitts off. You can break your wire without taking your mitts off, and you can make your snare without taking your mitts off.
When you're handling wire under any circumstance, there's the danger that the wire will hit you in the eye. So the smart person will take a centimeter or a little bit of the end and fold it so the rounded end hits you in the eye instead of the pointy end.
Another technique for delimbing with baton is this is a traveling roadshow. We're going to go over a pine tree over here. Yeah, lots of times it makes way more sense to take your limbs off your tree before you cut your tree down, if you're doing it, if it's already in a vise. Just the right snap. Probably in many ways more efficient than an axe. May be doing as good a job. Even some parity here. And a lot safer than an axe.
And after you're finished with that tree, in a while you can go and pick all the stuff that's oozing out of those injuries and use it for first aid purposes.
That may be asking a little bit, but if I had a big enough, solid enough baton, and even that tree wasn't in the way, that would be a candidate even. talk about being in survival situations and one of our go-to fire starters. Wrist thick, dead standing tree. The more vertical, of course, the less moisture in it. It's usually something that's rotted at the roots, so something that we can push over, and then we can process it by putting it between two trees.
You'll find that a tree that's horizontal is kind of, what do you call it, you don't use it for a ridgepole because it'll likely break. And when you are breaking firewood, those horizontal trees, you don't like them very much because they're so darn springy. Therefore, you pick on the horizontal trees for breaking pieces to more manageable stoking the fire.
Right. Save
And the vertical standing trees, you know, can be too springy to be, it will be exhausting for you to be breaking those a lot.
And speaking of which, there's a hazard too with flying shards. So you have your eye protection on, Morse?
Yeah, I'm sort of trying to remember which way the sticks fly.
A gunshot.
Someone figures that they'll come over here wanting to arrest you for shooting too close to the knife.
But I mean, the way that we're getting at the interior of,
Yep.
or getting to our dry wood.
Yeah, willow, dead willow really responds to that splintering.
Oh yes.
Yeah, if you know, there's a certain way you can bend it slowly with long handles, and it'll really give you the kindling, the very fine kindling to light fire with. So that you're doing that instead of trying to make feather sticks. Now sometimes you're trying to make shorter wood to put in an airtight. That's where you find that you've got to use the horizontal stuff.
Yeah.
Because you're hitting the tree and pieces like that are flying out.
Yeah.
And if you take a vertical tree, it's just too resistant to that type of.
Well, and trees that are been on the ground or close to the ground, sometimes just hitting them on the ground or actually just hitting them against the trunk. And
Give it a good hit, see if you can break that.
this, I don't know about this one. We'll see. Probably shake my eyeballs loose. No, it's a bear bat now.
It's your, it's a bear bat or a laundry bat or something. Because you generally find that, on the one hand, the vertical stuff you use it for where you don't want. You don't use the horizontal stuff for ladders and ridge poles and flip-flop winches.
Right.
Because they'll snap unpredictably. So you go to trouble to cut down the vertical trees, but the horizontal trees, they might not burn as well, but they're easier to process and to manage.
Right, and for shelters and for deadwood. So this is a technique for quickly removing the branches off the tree. I could have got something a little longer, but you get the idea here anyway. So two trees slightly askew.
I think this yearling comes particularly useful when you're trying to harvest sticks to build ski shoes out of. That's where you really save a lot of time. And the colder it is, the more magical the show, because when the branches aren't frozen, they want to bend instead of rubbing off. So when it's 30 below, it works better, more photogenic.